This is the ultimate skill, not because it makes you smarter, not because it makes you stronger, but because it transforms the way you move through life. It is the ability to master yourself, to understand what drives you, and to direct your thoughts, emotions, and actions with intention. Most people go through life reacting to circumstances, pulled by habits, fears, and impulses they never question. But the moment you realize you can step back, observe yourself, and choose your response, everything changes. You stop being a passenger and become the one steering the wheel. This skill gives you the power to pause when others panic. Instead of letting emotions take over, you begin to see them as signals, an invitation to understand what's happening inside you. When frustration rises, you notice it. When fear tries to hold you back, you recognize its pattern. When doubt whispers, you hear the tone but no longer obey it. Suddenly, you have space to choose clarity over chaos, patience over anger, courage over avoidance. That space is where transformation happens. Mastering yourself means you no longer wait for life to feel easier, you become stronger. Challenges, no longer define you, they reveal you. They show you what you're capable of, where you can grow, and how much potential you still carry. When others see obstacles, you see opportunities to practice resilience. When others complain, you practice gratitude. When others give up, you decide to take one more step. This is the skill that makes progress possible even in the darkest moments. It also changes the way you pursue goals. Instead of relying on motivation, something that comes and goes like a passing wave, you build discipline. Discipline is consistency built on awareness. It's understanding how your mind works and shaping your environment, habits, and choices to support your intentions. You stop fighting yourself and start designing your life. You eliminate distractions, silence excuses, and remind yourself who you're becoming. The world rewards talent, but it bows to those who can direct their own energy with purpose. This skill strengthens your relationships as well. You communicate with more clarity because you understand your own emotions before expressing them. You listen with more openness because you're grounded instead of defensive. You forgive more easily because you've learned to manage your own ego. People begin to feel safe with you, not because you never feel anger or sadness, but because you handle them with maturity and honesty. The quality of your relationships rises because the quality of your inner world does. And perhaps most importantly, mastering yourself gives you freedom. Freedom from old stories, from limiting beliefs, from destructive habits, from patterns you didn't choose but accidentally inherited. Freedom to redefine who you are and who you want to become. You stop living on autopilot and start living intentionally. Every day becomes a chance to practice the ultimate skill, self-mastery, until it becomes second nature, shaping your character, your future, and your destiny. This is the ultimate skill because everything in your life, your happiness, your success, your growth, your relationships comes from it. Once you master yourself, you stop being controlled by the world around you and start shaping it with the power of your choices. Self-mastery begins with the understanding that your power does not lie in the world outside you, but in the way you choose to respond to it. Most people move through life in a constant reaction mode, pushed and pulled by emotions, impulses, and the shifting circumstances of the day. They feel frustrated when things don't go their way, overwhelmed when challenges appear, or impatient when progress feels slow. But self-mastery shifts the entire dynamic. Instead of being controlled by life, you become the one steering your inner state, choosing your path with awareness rather than letting situations dictate your behavior. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm. Without self-mastery, the wind blows you in every direction. A negative comment ruins your mood. A small setback kills your motivation, and a moment of fear stops you from taking action. But when you cultivate mastery over your mind and emotions, you become the calm center in the storm. You start recognizing that your initial emotional reaction is not the final truth. You notice the rising frustration, fear, or doubt, but you don't let it command your decisions. You breathe, pause, and give yourself the space to respond intentionally. That space is where your strength grows. It's where clarity forms, where better choices emerge, and where your future begins to shift. Self-mastery is what separates people who repeatedly sabotage their progress from those who steadily move forward. When you're ruled by emotion, you act impulsively, and those impulses often pull you away from what you truly want. You might lash out when you're stressed, procrastinate when you're afraid, or give up when you encounter resistance. But with self-mastery, you develop the inner discipline to hold your course even when emotions surge. You can acknowledge fear without obeying it. You can feel doubt without collapsing. You can feel frustration without letting it poison your choices. This is not about suppressing emotions. It's about rising above them, understanding them, and guiding yourself with awareness, not impulses. Over time, this intentional way of responding becomes a powerful habit that changes everything. It shifts the way you handle conflict, challenges, and pressure. Instead of seeing obstacles as threats, you start seeing them as opportunities to practice strength. Instead of being thrown off by criticism, you learn to filter what is useful and release what is not. Instead of reacting instantly to discomfort, you create a moment of reflection to ask yourself what response aligns with your long-term goals. This self-reflection is what turns temporary setbacks into long-term growth. Self-mastery also transforms your relationships. When you're not controlled by emotional reactions, communication becomes clearer and more grounded. You no longer say things you later regret or let anger dictate your tone. You become someone who listens with presence, speaks with intention, and interacts with others from a place of strength instead of insecurity. People feel the difference. They sense your stability, your calm, and your self-respect. This attracts healthier connections and dissolves unnecessary conflict. On a personal level, self-mastery builds deep self-trust. You start proving to yourself that you can handle difficult moments without falling apart. Every time you choose awareness over reaction, reinforce the belief that you are strong, capable, and in control. This inner confidence becomes the foundation for bigger decisions, bolder steps, and greater risks that lead to growth. It becomes easier to pursue your goals because you know you won't sabotage yourself in moments of pressure or fear. With self-mastery, your choices become aligned with your values and vision. You're no longer making decisions based on temporary emotions, but on long-term intention. The path ahead becomes clearer because you're not clouded by momentary impulses or emotional turbulence. You stop being unpredictable to yourself. You become consistent. You become steady. You become someone who can be counted on by others and, most importantly, by yourself. Ultimately, self-mastery is the gateway to freedom. When you learn to respond intentionally instead of reacting emotionally, you stop being a prisoner of circumstances. You stop letting random moments dictate your day or your life. You gain the ability to shape your experience from the inside out, and that is where true power begins. When you control yourself, you control your life. It creates an inner space that most people never access, a quiet distance between what you feel and how you choose to respond. This space is where clarity replaces confusion, calm replaces overwhelm, and courage replaces fear. Most people live without this space. They feel an emotion and immediately react. They feel fear and freeze. They feel anger and lash out. They feel doubt and withdraw. Life becomes a series of automatic responses driven by old habits, past wounds, and unchecked thoughts. But when you cultivate the ability to step back and observe what is happening inside you, everything begins to change. In that moment of inner space, you become more than your reactions. You start noticing the thoughts that rush through your mind, some encouraging, others limiting, some rooted in truth, others shaped by past experiences that no longer define you. Without awareness, these thoughts operate in the background, influencing your choices, your mood, and your behavior without your consent. But when you learn to observe them, you detach from their influence. You see them as temporary mental events, not as facts. This is where clarity begins. You can evaluate a thought instead of obeying it. You can question a fear instead of surrendering to it. You can choose a new perspective instead of being imprisoned by an old one. This inner space also changes your relationship with your emotions. Instead of being swept away by anger, sadness, or anxiety, you learn to sit with these emotions and understand their origin. You notice how they rise, peak, and eventually fade. You see that feelings are signals, not commands. Anger might be pointing to a boundary crossed. Fear might be pointing to a place where growth is calling. Doubt might be pointing to a challenge that requires more preparation. When you observe instead of react, emotions become information rather than obstacles. This leads to calm, because calm isn't the absence of emotion, it's the ability to feel without losing yourself in the feeling. Inner space also strengthens your courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward despite it. When you can observe fear from a place of distance, you no longer see it as an enemy, but as a companion that arises whenever you step into the unknown. You recognize that fear often appears right before something important, meaningful, or transformative. Instead of shrinking back, you can take a breath, understand what the fear is trying to protect you from, and still choose the direction that aligns with your growth. This ability to choose courage over impulse is what allows your life to expand. As you practice observing your thoughts and emotions, the inner space grows. It becomes easier to pause before reacting, easier to reflect before deciding, and easier to choose a response that aligns with the person you want to be. This space becomes a personal sanctuary where clarity is accessible even during chaos. Challenges that once triggered panic now become moments where you naturally step into observation. Problems that once overwhelmed you now feel manageable because you're no longer battling yourself in the process of facing them. This inner space also enhances your sense of control. When you're no longer reacting, automatically you begin to feel like the driver of your own life again. You're aware of the thoughts that empower you and the ones that limit you. You can redirect your focus from what drains your energy to what strengthens your purpose. You start choosing actions aligned with your goals instead of being manipulated by momentary emotions. This sense of agency is deeply liberating. It gives you confidence because you know you can trust yourself to handle whatever arises with intention. Another powerful effect of this inner space is that it improves your relationships. When you observe your emotions instead of reacting to them, communication becomes more thoughtful, patient, and compassionate. You don't take things as personally. You don't lash out impulsively. You don't let anger control your voice or fear control your decisions. You can listen more deeply, speak more honestly, and connect more authentically. This level of emotional presence strengthens bonds and reduces unnecessary conflict, bringing more peace into your life. Over time, this inner space becomes a guiding force. It becomes the place where you make decisions, where you evaluate challenges, and where you reconnect with your values. It's the space where you remember who you want to be before you respond to what life throws at you. It's where wisdom grows, where patience lives, and where courage is born. Without this space, life feels chaotic and exhausting. With it, life becomes intentional and empowered. Ultimately, the ability to observe your thoughts and emotions without immediately reacting is one of the greatest skills you can develop. It gives you clarity and confusion, calm and stress, and courage and fear. It allows you to choose your path instead of being dragged by old patterns. And with every choice made from this inner space, you move closer to becoming the strongest, most grounded version of yourself. It improves relationships by helping you communicate with awareness, patience, and emotional maturity. Because when you learn to master yourself, you naturally begin to understand others more deeply. Most conflicts happen not because people are bad or incompatible, but because they react from emotion instead of responding with clarity. When you develop inner awareness, you no longer speak impulsively or let anger lead the conversation. You pause, reflect, and choose your words with intention, which creates harmony instead of tension. This makes your presence easier to connect with, and people feel safer, calmer, and more open around you. Self-mastery teaches you to listen, not just hear. You become aware of when your ego wants to defend itself, when your emotions want to take control, and when your assumptions are shaping the way you interpret someone else's words. Instead of reacting to the surface of what someone says, you learn to understand the meaning behind it. You start to sense their fears, their hopes, and their vulnerabilities. This makes your communication deeper and far more compassionate, because you're not responding to emotions with more emotion, you're responding with understanding. Patience becomes one of your greatest strengths. Instead of rushing to fix things, win arguments, or prove a point, you slow down long, enough to see the situation clearly. You realize that not every disagreement needs immediate resolution. Sometimes people simply need time to process their feelings, and self-mastery gives you the space to allow that. You don't take everything personally, and you don't let temporary emotions destroy long-term relationships. You understand that everyone, including you, is growing, learning, and navigating their own struggles. This understanding creates a softer, more stable way of relating. Emotional maturity shows up in the way you handle conflict. Instead of avoiding difficult conversations or exploding when overwhelmed, you communicate openly and respectfully. You express your feelings without blaming. You acknowledge the other person's perspective without trying to dominate. You recognize when you're wrong and take responsibility, which builds trust. You communicate your needs clearly and set healthy boundaries without guilt or aggression. This creates relationships where both people feel valued, heard, and respected. Self-mastery also helps you break old patterns, the ones that used to sabotage your relationships. Maybe you used to shut down when upset, lash out when insecure, or try to control things when you felt afraid. But as you grow more aware of your inner world, you begin to catch those patterns before they take over. You recognize the emotions rising in your body and choose a different response. This not only improves your connections with others, but also helps you become proud of the person you're becoming. You feel more in control, more grounded, and more capable of creating peaceful interactions. Your empathy deepens. When you understand your own emotions, you become better at understanding the emotions of others. You realize that everyone has moments of fear, frustration, confusion, and doubt. Instead of judging, you support. Instead of criticizing, you encourage. You stop expecting perfection and start appreciating effort. This shift makes you kinder, more patient, and more forgiving. People naturally feel more connected to someone who sees them with compassion instead of criticism. Self-mastery also improves the way you express love, not just in romantic relationships, but in friendships, family bonds, and professional connections. You become more intentional with your words, more considerate with your actions, and more consistent with your behavior. You show love not through grand gestures, but through presence, reliability, and understanding. This strengthens every relationship you touch because people can feel when someone is steady and emotionally grounded. It also makes you less reactive. When someone is upset, instead of matching their energy or mirroring their stress, you remain centered. Your calm becomes grounding for others. You diffuse tension instead of escalating it. You create space for honest conversation rather than heated argument. Your stability becomes a source of comfort, and people trust you more deeply because they know you won't fall apart or lash out when things get difficult. Self-mastery protects your relationships from unnecessary drama. You stop creating stories in your head. You stop assuming the worst. You stop letting insecurity control your interpretations. Instead, you seek clarity, communicate directly, and choose understanding over suspicion. This reduces conflict and builds an environment of emotional safety. Another powerful shift happens in the way you set and maintain boundaries. Emotional maturity helps you honor your needs while still respecting the needs of others. You stop overgiving, over-apologizing, and overextending yourself just to keep the peace. You communicate your limits with confidence, which leads to healthier, more balanced relationships where both people feel valued and respected. Finally, self-mastery helps you attract better relationships. As you grow emotionally, you naturally draw people who communicate with honesty, treat you with respect, and value growth just as much as you do. You stop settling for relationships rooted in chaos, insecurity, or inconsistency. Instead, you create connections built on trust, mutual understanding, and emotional maturity. In the end, improving your relationship with yourself improves every relationship in your life. When you speak with awareness, act with patience, and relate with emotional maturity, you become someone who brings peace, clarity, and strength into every interaction. And that creates connections not just worth having, but worth keeping. It gives you freedom from limiting beliefs and old patterns, empowering you to shape your future with purpose and intention. Most people don't realize how much of their life is controlled by old stories, ideas planted in childhood, shaped by environment, or formed during difficult moments. These beliefs often whisper things like you're not enough, you're too late, you're too broken, or you're not capable. They become invisible barriers, shaping your choices, limiting your confidence, and keeping you stuck in cycles that don't serve your growth. But when you develop self-mastery, you begin to recognize these beliefs for what they are, outdated scripts, not truths. You start to question them instead of obeying them, and with that awareness comes liberation. Self-awareness shines a light on patterns you used to follow unconsciously. Maybe you always quit when things got hard, avoided risks because of fear, or stayed in situations that didn't honor your worth. These patterns become so familiar that they feel safe even when they hold you back. But when you learn to observe your thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them, you begin to see the roots of these patterns. You understand why you reacted a certain way, why you repeated certain cycles, and why you accepted less than you deserved. This understanding becomes the first step toward freedom, because you cannot change what you cannot see. Breaking free from old patterns doesn't happen overnight. It requires courage, the courage to let go of what is familiar, even when it feels comfortable, and step into a version of yourself that you haven't fully met yet. Self-mastery gives you that courage. It teaches you to face discomfort without running from it. It shows you that growth always feels unfamiliar at first, and that the path to self-transformation often begins with letting go of who you used to be. Instead of shrinking in the face of uncertainty, you lean into it. You trust yourself enough to walk into the unknown, believing that something greater is waiting on the other side. As you challenge limiting beliefs, you begin to replace them with empowering ones. Instead of saying, I can't, you begin to say, I can figure this out. Instead of saying, I'm not good enough, you remind yourself of your progress and potential. Instead of believing that you're stuck, you recognize that every moment offers a choice. These new beliefs don't just change your thoughts, they change the way you show up in the world. You take more risks, speak with more confidence, and move with deeper intention. You begin to act like someone who believes in their own capability, and that belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you free yourself from limiting beliefs, you also free yourself from the need to seek constant approval. Instead of shaping your life around what others expect, you start shaping it around what you truly desire. You stop living through other people's opinions and start living according to your own values. This shift is one of the most liberating experiences a person can have because it gives you ownership of your life. You stop asking for permission to grow, evolve, or succeed. You start giving yourself permission. Self-mastery also helps you rewrite the patterns you inherited, patterns of fear, scarcity, insecurity, or self-doubt. You realize that just because something has been true for years doesn't mean it has to define your future. You don't have to repeat your past. You don't have to carry generational limitations. You don't have to accept the narrative you were given. You can break cycles. You can create new standards. You can become the version of yourself that you always knew was possible, but never fully believed you could embody. As you release these old patterns, your vision becomes clearer. You start to see possibilities that once felt out of reach. You feel inspired again. You dream bigger. You understand that your future is not something that just happens. It's something you actively create through your thoughts, decisions, and habits. You stop drifting and begin directing your life with intention. Every choice becomes an opportunity to shape the path ahead. Every step becomes part of a larger purpose. Consistency becomes easier because you're no longer battling the weight of self-doubt. When you believe you can succeed, you show up differently. You commit more fully. You persevere longer. You take action with confidence instead of hesitation. And with every forward step, you reinforce the empowering beliefs that replace the limiting ones. Momentum builds, and your future begins to take shape with clarity and strength. This freedom also brings peace. When you're not trapped in old patterns, life feels lighter. Your mind becomes calmer, your decisions become clearer, you stop fighting with yourself internally, you no longer sabotage your progress. You no longer hold yourself back, you begin to trust your own judgment, your own voice, and your own path. And that inner peace becomes the foundation upon which you build everything else. As you move forward with purpose and intention, you realize that your past didn't break you, it prepared you. Your limiting beliefs didn't define you, they challenged you. Your old patterns weren't failures, they were lessons. And now, with self-mastery, you have the power to choose differently. You can design the life you want. You can become the person you were meant to be. You can build a future that reflects your strength, not your fears. Freedom begins in the mind, and once you claim that freedom, every part of your life begins to rise.